So in this video, we're going to be talking about all things hip mobility, the difference between active mobility and passive mobility. I'll be walking you guys through kind of a global hip mobility routine, and then we're going to be talking more specifically about what we can do to improve your squatting mobility, because that's one of the most common complaints we see in our clinic. So if you don't know the difference between active and passive mobility, it's a pretty important thing to distinguish. Passive mobility is how far you can bring up a certain joint or body part while using a different body part, gravity, or something like that to assist you. If I'm trying to bring my hip up, an example of passive mobility, passive hip flexion, would be me hugging my hip upwards, right? In reality, my active mobility, I can probably only bring it up about this far by itself. So the active mobility is how much you can bring it up using that muscle, but passively, I can bring it higher. So our goal for physical therapy and for strength and conditioning, movement in general, is to get that active and passive mobility about as close as we can. I don't want my patients being super mobile if they're not strong in those end ranges as well. So we're going to be testing and retesting a squat throughout this just to see how you feel, how deep you can get, if you have any tightness, stiffness in any of those regions when you are moving into a deep squat. So drop into that deep squat and see how you feel there. Does anything feel restricted? Are your heels coming off the floor? Is there any tightness in the front of your hips, stiffness, pinching, anything like that? Just remember how you're feeling in this moment, and then as we go through all these mobility routines and drills, we'll reassess it throughout and see if you feel any different. All right, so let's get into it. First off, we're gonna be going through a nice global hip mobility routine. So our first thing that we're gonna start with is hip rockers. So I want you to put your knees about hip width apart, hands are in front of you, and we're rocking our hips backwards into child's pose if you do yoga. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna rock back and forth. So rocking all the way back, trying to get that butt as close to your heels as possible, and coming back up. So you're gonna do that about 5 to 10 times, just trying to gradually work your way back a little bit further. All right, now we're gonna widen out those legs, taking a nice broad stance here. And same thing, rocking backwards. You should feel a nice stretch through your groin with this one. So just coming up and rocking back. Gradually getting back a little bit further each time. All right, next one, we're gonna kick a leg straight out to the side and do the same thing, rocking back and forward. You should feel a nice little stretch through your hamstring right here. Hamstrings and adductors are what we're trying to hit with this one. All right, so now we're gonna get into the tricky one. This one, we're gonna cross an ankle over your opposite leg. So in this position, we're just gonna rock backwards and forwards. Just feeling that stretch in the back of your hip and your glutes, out to the side of your hip a little bit. Good. This next one, we're gonna be on all fours again. This is called hip cars, or circular articulating rotations. So basically hip circles, right? So all we're doing here is I want you to go through the full range when we're going, but you're gonna bring your knee as far up as you can towards your hands, bring it outwards, rotating, extend that hip, and come back through. Again, all the way up, out, extending, and back through. So I'll do 5 to 10 of those one way, and then we're gonna switch directions. So this time we're extending all the way back, rotating, bringing that knee up into the side, and back down. So extending all the way up, rotating with that leg extended, coming back through and down. All right, this next one we're gonna perform in seated. So I want your legs to be out pretty wide here, and all we're gonna do is practice some hip internal and external rotation. So we're just gonna let our legs rotate from side to side. You can start off with your hands behind you. That'll make it a little bit easier. But eventually I want you to progress towards where your hands are up, and you're actively working on bringing those legs up and through, getting your knees to touch on either side if possible. Some people may have a lot of problems with this, and that's okay. We're just trying to work through as much range of motion as you have, gradually trying to get deeper and deeper. So once this feels pretty easy, we're gonna lean into it. So we're gonna lean into that front leg. You should feel a stretch in that posterior hip and those glutes, that piriformis, all of those. And then you're gonna switch sides and you're leaning into the opposite leg, right? So that's the next step. The final progression we're gonna do, when we're coming over, we're gonna push through, squeeze the glute and come up, okay? So we're gonna do that from side to side. About 5 reps on each side, squeezing your glutes at the top each time. Good. So for this next one, we're gonna come on down to the floor, laying on your back. I want you to stretch out both of your legs straight and then bring one knee up, hold right behind that knee. All we're doing is an active hamstring stretch. So we're kicking up, holding for a couple seconds and back down. For anybody with sciatica, this is very, very similar to sciatic nerve flossing as well. So you should feel that right in the back of your thigh and those hamstrings. If you are feeling it down into your calf and your foot, that's more of a sciatic nerve tensioner, right? Because our hamstrings don't go all the way down there, but our sciatic nerve does stretch all the way from our low back, our glutes, all the way down into those feet. So we're gonna do about 10 reps on each side. All right, so now we're gonna work on active hip flexion, okay? So our hip flexors are one of the most, I'd say, neglected in training because they're very, very hard to isolate when we're doing traditional weightlifting. So this is one way that we can really isolate those hip flexors in a shortened position to really go through that end range of motion while working on that active mobility. So we're sitting up. You can start with your arms behind you, and all we're doing is we're lifting one leg up, tapping, and coming back down. You can do this with the yoga block. I'm doing it with a tension block. Do it with a water bottle, whatever you want, as long as you have something visual that you can come up and tap. If you're trying to get a little more advanced, do it without holding on to anything. Try avoid leaning backwards, keeping your torso nice and upright so that we're really working in that end range, right? If you want to make it harder, flip your block up to its tallest setting and come up and down. If you're really, really strong, you can do 2 legs at once. I'm not that strong. I'll cheat if I try that, but try it out and see how you do. So now we're gonna work into more of that squat specific mobility because I really want us to get comfortable in those end ranges. So our first one that we're gonna do here is called a loaded hip opener. So I want you to be kneeling on one leg, bring your other leg out nice and wide as far as you can go. Wide. You're gonna pick up a weight and we're just gonna rock into that outwardly stretched leg until you feel a nice stretch through the groin. I want you to squeeze your glutes on this one, really getting everything involved while we're doing this. So you're gonna rock out and back in and hold in this position for 5 to 10 seconds, really squeezing those glutes, feeling the stretch through your adductors, and then rock back out. So we're gonna move straight from that loaded hip opener into what we call the world's greatest stretch. So you're basically in this nice half kneeling or lunging position. All I want you to do is dive steep down, trying to reach your elbows down towards your foot, feeling a nice stretch through your groin on this side. You can come up if you want to get more of a hip flexor stretch in that leg that's down. And from here, I want you to come back down and we're going to do some rotations, right? So I want you to bring this elbow down and then bring it up nice and high, rotating towards the sky. And rotating back down, really trying to dive as deep as you can before rotating back up. This is a nice thoracic opener, so we're getting some spinal rotation along with that deep stretch in our hip flexor and our groin. So then we're gonna move straight from that world's greatest lunge into a Cossack lunge. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring both feet so they're facing straight ahead, and you're gonna do a nice deep side lunge, letting your toes peel up towards the sky on that outstretched leg, and then coming up towards the other side, working as deep as you can, feeling a nice stretch through those hamstrings. All right, after going through all that, I think you should come back up and retest that deep squat, see how you feel, see if anything's improved, if there's still that lingering tightness, that pinching, anything like that. Just be mindful of how it feels now compared to how it felt when we first started. All right, now we're working in the really squat specific stuff. So I want you to get in a nice deep squat. Your feet are a little bit wider than your hips, and I want you to put your elbows in to that inner thigh and push out against that thigh until you feel a nice stretch in the groin. And then let's do a little bit of rotation. Getting a little hip rotation on both sides while we're in this position. All right, this next one, we're gonna drop into a nice, deep, wide squat. So our feet are nice, wide, far apart, our toes are pointed out, and we're dropping in, feeling a nice stretch through our groin, bringing our elbows in, pushing out a little bit, holding that position, squeezing the butt muscles, trying to stay nice and upright. You can rock from side to side if you want, but what I really wanna work on right here is some more of those thoracic rotations. So drive this elbow into one leg, and then we're gonna reach up to the sky with the opposite hand. Coming down, and now reach up the other way. So you have a couple options for that one. You can either alternate from side to side, or you can do a few reps on one side and then switch to the other side. All right, so for our finisher here, we're in that wide squat. We've done our rotations, right? And now what we're gonna do is we're really gonna make sure everything's activating. So we're gonna do a nice little pulse squat here. Trying to get a little bit deeper with each pulse. Really feeling those quads, those glutes working, everything stretching, and we're getting nice and deep. That's it for all of our exercises. Retest that squat, come on down nice and low, and see how you feel in this position. Is it any different than when we started? Is there more tightness? Is there less? You feeling any pinching still? Just be mindful of how your body feels. If you do feel like you can drop a little bit deeper, maybe doing something like this would be beneficial for you. So if you do feel like you got some benefit from these exercises, a good application to doing this would be doing a couple of these stretches before you actually do a squat. So something like this during your warm-up to get your muscles primed and moving, but also working into those deeper end ranges can really benefit you when you are doing those heavier squats. So the big takeaway I want you to take from this is that there is a difference between active and passive mobility. We didn't come on here today just to do some basic stretching, to do these nice long static holds. We were constantly moving through these motions and really working on activating muscles while we're getting into those end ranges. Those are the things I really want you to think about when you are exercising. Really thinking about, is it beneficial to have more mobility in the terms of being more flexible, or is it more beneficial to have strength in that end range? Obviously, passive mobility is very important, but having strength in those end ranges can really help us prevent injury, make us feel strong, and allow us to get out of those positions safely. So hopefully you guys found this helpful. Leave a comment below, subscribe if you want to see more of this stuff, and yeah, overall just let us know what you thought.